Hello. I was kind of thinking of speaking really calmly, but like we have this pumping music to get it started. This is definitely the biggest audience I've ever had in my life. This festival is really enormous and something just superb across the whole town. So really congratulations to the whole team for that. So today I'm going to talk about some of our works, why we make those works, what the ideas are in those works. The works themselves are the correct way of receiving the message of the works, but this is the second best. It's me trying to explain it. So you can think that when you have something existing as a work of art, that's like an internet connection. It's like a connection between the audience and the viewer. And when you have someone explaining it, it's like the dial-up sounds. It's just like me trying to start that connection off, right? It's like I'm just a... Hopefully one day you'll see the real connection. There's two members of Kimchi and Chips. There's myself and Mimi. Mimi's here. She's working on some chemical process for mirror silvering. When she presents, she has a very different narrative, completely different narrative to when I present. So I don't want to pretend that this is a complete story. This is my side of the story of the works we make. So our work often involves technical elements, optical systems, very tightly calibrated projections of light in space. And they're performed using machine learning systems and mechanics. And then eventually they come out into these phenomena that exist in the real world. And then there's some interaction with the bodies of the people when they use their senses to encounter them. So I want to start with like an example of a very early work. It's one of our first works. And we have a tree. It's a bamboo tree. And we have some video projectors facing into the tree. And you can imagine a video projector is like a literal set of beams of light, like this beam of light, right? So every pixel is a beam of light traveling through space, and it goes and hits a random place on this tree. So there's a cloud of positions which are all lit up individually. And if we can figure out where they all are, then we could create a shape, a form in the air. So we could create like a three-dimensional form using the tree as a kind of array of LEDs in a way. But the thing is, when we do that, we have this relationship with this object, which is not dead, it's alive, and that object reacts to light. So the growth of the object, the growth of the tree, is changing during the course of the exhibition in relation to the light that we're projecting onto it. So we can see it in the 3D scans, and we can see it with our own eyes, that the branches at the back start to search out the light. And we let the audience interact with this so they can be a part of the process of releasing hormones in the tree, so that there could be some communication between the humans and this different kind of intelligence. So our works often deal with spectacle, and I still don't really know how I feel about that word. It sounds tacky and trashy, and that's kind of why I use it. But what kind of spectacles were around when I was growing up with these spectacles, like the spectacles of the Cold War? So I started in the north of England, and down the street we had the Lovell telescope and the Hisham nuclear power plant, and these were huge spectacles of science, things that were uncompromising large machines. And you know, the Lovell telescope was used to track the Apollo landings as they landed on the moon, and then the nuclear power station created the fuel that was put into the missiles that followed the life of those rockets. But the machine that fascinated me the most was when my dad brought home a VHS video that explained this storage library. And it's a very drab thing. It's like this beige castle. And inside there's a robot arm that moves around, and it picks up tapes and moves them somewhere else and puts them in. And those tapes are a random access memory of records, right, in this spatial set. And my dad worked for the county council, so all of these records which were there were births, deaths, marriages, maybe social problems that were happening, social projects that were happening. So what happened is that society had been transformed into this digital form and then made physical again, but in this encrypted way where the human can't understand it, right? in there is a marriage, in there's someone's life, but you can't see it, only the machine can really figure it out. But as we're all familiar with, like the evolution of technology was to move away all of that storage, to make it immaterial. The storage starts to not exist and the image takes over. So we have the information in there, which is coming to us in the form of these images, and that's our principal way of spatializing information in the world. And what I want to argue is that images change the way we see. So they change the way we see the world around us. And I'm going to get a little bit didactic, I think the word is, for a moment. So we have this relationship between things in imagination, so things which are in our head, which we can't describe, and we want them to be in the world. And we do so by making them into images. So a drawing is a type of an image where we format a set of thoughts into something else, right? Something that exists in the world and that can be shared with others and is worldly. So this image exists both in imaginary space and worldly space. And there's many different kinds of images, and they all have different possibilities for what imaginations they can articulate. If there was only one type of image, then only one set of imaginations could exist in the world. But as you transfer imaginations through these images, the image system becomes imprinted on it. I'm just going to read these out briefly. So imagination exists in the physical world as images. And to make that image, you need an image system. We can think of like a screen or something like that. And then those image systems imprint and filter personalities onto those imaginations. And people's imaginations are then in turn informed by it. So when you see images existing out in the world, your imagination changes because you've seen which images are successful. Then popular image systems resonate with successful networks of power. So you'll see some examples in the talk. And different image systems are able to represent different imaginations, which I mentioned before. Where an image system is unable to represent imagination, it instead starts to represent itself. So this is like glitch, when like a screen starts to fall apart. You see the pixels, you see the grain on the photography and photograph. So one of the profound examples of this was the Romanian live revolution, literally called the live revolution, which a lot of you might be familiar with. And the dictator at the time programmed only television programs which were propaganda about himself. So what's happening was the image that was being transmitted with this most successful image system, television, wasn't resonating with the imagination of the audience. And then there was a glitch in the system. The television camera faced the wrong way one day, and people saw a protest. And then people came out onto the streets, and they took over the television station. And so it went from destroying a government, starting a revolution from a glitch in the system, the television, to forming a new government, which was formed by storming the television station. Another story of images, which was happening around the same time, was when Kodak was trying to realign the imaginations it could represent. So Kodak around the 1930s started making color photography. And only much later did they start to realize there was a bit of bias within that color photography. There's many artists who've talked about this. I think on the corner we have some references. So when they started shipping out to color labs to make their own photographs, they'd ship out this Shirley card, and this was the normal image, it was the archetypal image. This was the correct image, which people would use to test out their ability to produce photographs. But it had a bit of a flaw in that it couldn't actually represent a variety of skin tones. And only when they made the Kodak Gold Max, which was advertised as being able to photograph a dark horse in a dark space and chocolate, whereas other skin tones able to be represented. So you can imagine that during that whole era, like one of the things that was very dominant was cinema. That really massively changed people's imaginations. And that technology was completely dependent on photography, on these film stocks. And yet it was completely masking out an entire set of the community. And now this color photography is formed in a different way, the color chemistry, as we call it. So we know that artificially intelligent systems are used to transform the system, the data from the sensor into what we accept as a modern image. So the AI is trained on which images are successful during an era of time, and then it starts to think about what is success, what's success within an image. And again, Hito Steyl calls this deciding what is a butt and what is a face. So we're going to go into an example of television. So the very first color television broadcast was by CBS, and it only lasted for 6 months, the system, this color broadcast system. And it was, the reason why they stopped it was because of the Korean War. And because of the Korean War, they wanted to keep all of the resources for other means, so they actually cancelled color television. And it was only until much later that NTSC came out. And you'll see when the next image comes up that they have something in common with the previous test cards that were being used. So this system that replaced it was NTSC. So between 1954 and 2012, this was the dominant format within which people experienced history, was NTSC television. So all of these profound events were filtered through that image system. And as we said, that like the message in the imagination is filtered and transformed by the image system. So all of this time, all of this history was experienced through NTSC, well, and other related formats. So this is, again, a bit of an earlier work, and we were looking at what happens when you make an image like NTSC. So you construct it out of 483 lines. And those lines, they're like a vinyl recording. They're not like pixels, they're continuums. And the broadcasts in Korea had just stopped. They just stopped doing the analog broadcasts. And we kind of missed that feeling of getting close to the television screen. Put some sound on. That feeling of being young and getting really close to the analog screen and seeing the image fall apart. And seeing the things in the image which were beyond the image itself, the glitch aesthetic. So we create this installation where we have 483 strings on each side of the room, and each one is Kevlar string wrapped in a nylon outer coating and then tensioned with 5 kilograms of tension equally. So they're all perfectly straight across the gallery. And then they're arranged in these waves so that from the point of view of the projector, they're all visible. So the projector can project them all individually. And that means we can start to create fields of light in space. We can create a new type of image with this. We create this volumetric image. Oops. Okay. So, as you're familiar, again, there's a lot of people in tech here who know like art and tech, so I keep saying as you're familiar, but I'll try to explain things. Cameras are changing, images are changing. In the post-computation era, cameras start to become more active. So they might like project things out into the world and look at the way those projections distort. Or they might network cameras where you're thinking about multi-iris cameras. So computers are starting to see the world in their own way. We wanted to invert this type of capture, this type of image production, and project it back out into the world. The same way that if you take a camera, if you invert it, it becomes a projector. We wanted to take these new types of cameras and invert them and see what type of image was built into them. So we built this structure of curved mirrors, and each one acts like a lens. So each one acts like an individual video projector. And you can imagine if each one is a projector, then they can all fire light out into space. And we can have that light overlap somewhere. So all of the light from all of these projectors converges somewhere, focuses somewhere in the air. We can move that around. And with a bit of haze in the air, we can see that become a visible feature. More. We created a very basic AI system in order to try to design this structure because it was something with too many parameters for a human to do. And it would try to gather all of those images up in front of the viewer. So again, we're creating a new type of image here. So previously we were talking about existing image formats, and now we're trying to make a new image format. An image which exists in physical space, an image that can move around between people. And it has certain capabilities, and it also lacks a lot, right? It can't do a certain type of detail that a screen could do. It can represent a different set of imaginations. Not very good at skipping, am I? Let's keep going then. Okay. Oops. Often the works can be seen from different distances, so if you're standing really back, you see the full effect, so to speak, but as you come closer, you can see the way it's working. We really want people to be able to figure it out for themselves. Like, we're not doing any magic tricks here, there's nothing concealed. We're not pretending there's a floating image there, we're really, really trying to make one. And that means that, you know, we have to put up with the fact that such an idea doesn't work particularly well. But then we get closer and closer, you can start to see the optics working, making those individual beams of light in the air. So this was presented in Gwangju in 2016 for a commission. So we produced the mirrors ourselves, as in started with a basic mirror and cut it into all these different shapes using the fabrication space, which was in the art center. And then we designed the structure in a very simple way, where we could laser cut steel pieces and have them welded together, and then this whole thing would become a rigid double curvature. On top of that, there's a 14-channel sound system with the capability to spatialize where those sounds occur. Now, we were making all these things in these dark spaces where we had complete control, right? So like we can do whatever we want in a way in a dark space because people don't know if it's real or not. And we're using these technologies where it's very difficult to describe what happens inside a video projector. Like if you ask somebody to describe the internals of it, it's not very instinctive, right? So we were constructing these things that were trying to be relationships with reality, and yet at the same time, people wouldn't be able to construct it out of their own imagination. And of course we were encountering this issue, this global issue of climate change. And I really love this quote, and it's to talk about the fact that scientific solutions alone are not enough for fixing climate change. We really have to change our imagination around the issue. And that's where artists have a little bit of an outsized role, because we're involved in that relationship between reality and imagination. So we should be doing more than others, and we should be sensitive to the imaginations that we're celebrating. Are we celebrating complete control over nature, or are we celebrating something where we have to collaborate with it? So we want to make some kind of image system that communicates with these ideas of nature, or our ideas of nature. And we can't do that inside a dark basement, inside a room where is full of technology and it's completely separated from the world. We need to do it out there in the real world, in the city, what we call the existing schedule of the city. And when you make an image with technology underneath the sun, the sun is shining down, the sun is your enemy, right? The sun is the thing that's going to wash your image out and completely destroy it. So instead of trying to fight it, we fight it with judo. In judo, you use the power of your enemy to overcome them. So we do these judo throws with these mirrors to try to bring the energy back where we want it. So with these bathroom mirrors, we can bounce the energy back and create these traces of light in the air. And then with the mist, those traces become visible. And the concept would be if we can do this judo in a very accurate way, we could start to draw images in the air with these traces of light. So this could become a methodology for drawing in the air in the middle of the day. But the thing is, we need a very competent judo player for this, right? We need something which can cope with the sun's continuous movements, can cope with the elements. So we built this robot which can exist outdoors and can hold this mirror in this very accurate but very relaxed way. It's not constantly under pressure. It's actually all counterbalanced. It's all very free to move. And there's a little bit of extra weight on the bottom, because actually we were really worried that if it points at the wrong thing, it might set something on fire. So once we had all these heliostats, these mirrors that can track the sun, we thought that would give us our relationship with nature that we were seeking, that it could create something out of nature. But what we realized is we were missing the force that was going to be dominant here. The force wasn't going to be the sun, it was going to be the wind. How were we going to make this mist catch that sunlight became a huge challenge. So we started thinking about the fact that the mist is it's the thing that makes the air visible, right? So we're doing all these projects talking about drawing in the air, but we never really thought about the air, right? And the air became this incredibly complicated thing that just does its own stuff, right? And we start to really see that we can get so far by tweaking all the parameters of the mist system, but what we eventually came up with was to accept that the wind is there and arrange the mist around and let the wind bring it in to where we wanted it to be. So that's why there's these towers we're positioning around. That's I wouldn't say. So eventually we were able to get this consistent mist. And the trick actually is to use less water. It's to shatter the water particles into as small as possible. And what happens then is that if you have one water particle like this, the light comes in, it bounces once. If you have 2, it bounces twice. If you have 4, it bounces 4 times, right? So actually, if the smaller and smaller and smaller they get, the more they bounce the light around, the more it scatters the light. So we found we could make these very, very, very small particles by shattering the water. And then these works that we make, they're not like we make a CAD model and we send it to print, and then this thing comes back. There's a lot of decisions made along the way at every stage by a distributed set of talented people. And the funny thing is, during the stage, no one knows what it's going to look like. Right? We've got this idea of a project that we want to make. No one's ever seen it. First time that we see it is after the opening, usually. So here we're testing out the servo motors, rearranging things, one by one, addressing, checking axes, wiring for the moving axis. And like I said, we didn't know what it was going to look like until afterwards. So this thing, eventually we realized it arrives in transitions. It comes in a dynamic way. It's not a state, it's a difference. So it would come in this moment, this completely this configuration of air, where the mist would enter and make this image visible. And you can never recreate one of those moments because there's so much complexity in the air. Every time it's going to be unique. So you can't just come and see it. You have to wait. You have to wait for it to come. If it's cloudy that day, you have to wait for a sunny day. If it's too much wind at that moment, you have to wait. And then maybe the image will arrive. So it unschedules the space. This is one of the things we found in this relationship with nature, is that our lack of control over it is the natural way of things, is the way in which we can collaborate with it better. And we can think about over the course of the exhibition, several weeks, sometimes it's rainy for a few days and people can't see it. Then you've got the scope of the day. In the morning it's very different to the night because the sun's in a different position. And then you've got the scope of the seconds where there's that animation of the air. It's like different time scales. So it's very much a time-based work. But seeing halo became a bit of a sport. So we called it halo spotting because you had to be there at the right time and get it. It was like bird watching or something like that. So it was a bit like this wild animal, and people would have to be there ready, waiting for this wild animal to arrive. And then when it came, they'd have to decide, do I take a photo or do I look at it? Because you can only do one, right? And it's one of those experiences where it's like looking at the shore of water. Like if you see water coming in on the rocks on the shore, and there's so much detail, there's so much going on, you can't possibly transmit all of that information into your brain. Your senses are saturated at that point. That kind of cloud of mist in the air, there's too much information to possibly get all of it into your mind. But of course the image can be failed to be seen, so this is the opening day of the exhibition, right? So we have these kind of lost ships at sea in the fog. So when it's a cloudy day, it's very humid, it's more humid, and that means that the fog becomes much thicker and it becomes this fog sculpture. And people just have to imagine maybe something would be there. And like I said, this was the opening, and we still had never seen the halo at this point, right? But some people told us they'd seen it. And it's kind of one of these very strange things about making these artworks, is that it takes a really long time after you've made it to see it, because other people often see it first before you do. When you make something, it takes like a couple of weeks for me anyway, before I really know what I'm looking at. So when it does appear, this halo is lit by the power of 100 suns. So there's 99 reflections, and plus the sun directly into it, right? So that's a 1 million lumen video projector. So anyone who's got like a fetish for video projectors might like that number. And inside that region, there's 40 kilowatts of sunlight. So if you go in there, it's obviously quite dangerous, and we don't allow people, we constantly watch it. And that's why, if we ever need to shut it down, the mirrors go up. So only by giving up the control, by using this energy where it is and finding it and waiting when it's not, can we create this kind of work. And this is like the way we found we could potentially collaborate with nature as opposed to trying to overpower it, by giving up control. And then we ended up in this almost inverse relationship. So everybody knows this story. Our extensive use of fossil fuels, starting with coal, have created a very different relationship with nature, where we don't wait. So that's the kind of difference to me, is waiting and not waiting, being in control and not being in control. So there's this site, which is the Zecker-Zollverein in Germany, and it was the largest coal mine in Europe. And you can see the architecture is like pulling out the coal from the ground. And the land underneath this region is traumatized. It's needs constant care, and that's why the buildings are still there. If they stop caring, then the land will subside and the rivers will be poisoned, right? And all that coal that's been gathered up is now in the air, it's in the sky. So this is a bit of a funny place to try to get a commission from. So yeah, our sky now stores this coal in a way that will likely cause harm to humans, displace humans, traumatize humans, and all over the planet they'll be affected by it. And if we look back to the history of coal, so the first coal power plant was in 1882, and it was on the corner of Wall Street and Pearl Street, right? And this was like the beginning of the Second Industrial Revolution, the beginning of capitalism simultaneously. They were taking coal and they were converting it into a new product that could be transmitted over wires rather than pipes or trucks, right? This was a new type of product, an immaterial product. And this caused this wave of electrification. So the wave of electrification spread out all over the world. But this wave still hasn't got everywhere yet. There's still a lot of energy inequity. Like we can think about a second wave, a wave of green energy, but we need to think of it as a wave. It's not going to happen simultaneously. It has to start. It has to initiate, right? It has to start spreading out. But green energy is very different to that on-demand energy of coal. So the way we use energy through the day is really dependent on our behavior, what our desires are. And whenever this curve goes up, we can throw more coal in the fire. And whenever it goes down, we can put a bit less in. So the thing that works with fossil fuels is it just responds whenever we want energy. It responds and gives us whatever we want. But that's not true with solar and wind, right? They just come in this scattered, spectacular way, and then they disappear, right? Like, this is like our Halo project, where we don't know when you're going to be able to see it or not. And one thing that we're very much sold on is this notion of storage, that we could store this energy and use it later. But there's enormous environmental impacts also to storage. We can only buffer it so much. What we really need to do is change our relationship with energy, like we have with the internet or the weather. So the internet is like, oh, it's really slow yesterday here, right? Sorry to everyone whose talk was cancelled because of that. And then today it's fast, right? And that's what we need to think about with energy. It needs to be like that, where one day it could be like bad and difficult and problematic and not really available. And I can't charge my car. I can't use my washing machine. And the next day, or like 3 hours later, all of a sudden, the car starts charging. The washing machine goes on. It's much more, to me, well, one of the things that's important to me is not just the total amount of energy we're using, but really that giving up control about when it exists, when it's there. So in this coal mine, we decided to make this drawing with sunlight, but we wanted to do it at night. So we think about the moon in the sky, right? The moon in the sky is this reflection of sunlight. It's like sunlight that's bounced off and created this image in the sky. So we thought we'd do the same thing, but instead of bouncing the sunlight directly, we'd bounce it through time. So we'd temporally reflect the sunlight. We'd gather it during the day and then shine it back out into the sky at night. And using this technique, we'd create this moon in the sky. So we have these towers, and we arrange 40 of them around the site. And they all tightly calibrate their beams together. And where that light overlaps, it's describing the outside of a sphere. Actually, the sphere itself is hollow, there's nothing inside. That's what you're seeing, that's what's visible, is actually the lack of light, rather than the presence of light. And this thing works like a big top tent, a big structure which you can get inside. So the towers are all independent. There's no data or power going to these towers. There's no wires, right? Everyone is working independently. And at the end of each night, each one turns off, or more accurately, its battery dies, right? So they just randomly go off in the night. And that time when they extinguish is depending on the energy of the day. So if you have a very bright day, then the exhibition is very long. If you have a rainy day, the exhibition is very short. So people know when to come, right? They know that something can be spectacular when it's there, and it can be nothing when it's not. And that's okay. Right? That's the kind of thing that we could have in our lives. That's the kind of thing that could be worth seeing. I'll show how we made this project. I'm actually okay for time, which is a bit strange. I thought it would be way over. So we actually spent 7 years making this project, from 2014 until 2021. We came up with the concept after making Light Barrier, an earlier version of the project I showed before. We presented it to many different people. We got little bits of sponsorship along the way, like we'll give you a projector for a weekend, something like that. And then using that sponsorship and support from other people, wow, this video really doesn't want to play. So first we do computer simulations. So we try to accurately simulate how the beams might work in space. And then we knew that laser projectors are too expensive to make 40 of them. And if you take a normal laser projector and put it outside, it's not going to be waterproof, and you have to put a big case on it, and it's even more expensive. So we made our own laser projectors, which were waterproof, and worked on this very low power. So it could work on the power directly from the batteries. So we created 40 of these enclosures, which are have inside a Raspberry Pi computer, Wi-Fi antenna, and some voltage regulators and such. And those 40 laser projectors, they all go onto one pallet, right? And you saw they came in those black plastic boxes. And then when we arrive on site, we can locally get hold of these trusses, these towers, essentially. And we assemble onto the towers these solar panels and the laser projector. And at the bottom of each tower is the plastic box. And inside that plastic box are the batteries. So we can reuse the materials that are used for shipping for the exhibition itself. So each tower is placed on this perimeter. We have to aim the lasers inwards. And we have some wireless network at the start in order to calibrate everything together and send instructions of how we're going to make everything line up in the air. I mean, the thing that's good about laser light is that all of it ends up in the thing that you're using versus video projectors. So with a video projector, you're throwing away a lot of the light, and it becomes very hot, whereas with a laser projector, it's just all going to whichever thing you're doing. So when we're drawing that cone of light, the whole laser projector is using about 60 watts of energy, right? So it can then survive off of this solar-charged apparatus. So the installation, it feels a lot like being under a big top tent, like I said. This is always the darkest video, which is a bit tricky. So there's this structure of light, which is 50 kilometers high where the moon is, but several kilometers continually into the sky, the beams travel. Well, they travel forever, infinitely, in fact. But they're visible within the atmosphere. And sometimes the beams hit against the clouds, so we get these extra artifacts, these kind of rings of light in the sky. And you can see it from these different distances. So you can be a kilometer away, and you can kind of see the shape on the horizon. You get close, and you can see the whole scene. And then when you get directly underneath, you get what we call the flower, which is when you get this very symmetric image. And the dimensionality of it is quite interesting. It's quite unusual. And then finally, at the end of each night, like I said, each tower will turn off one by one. So again, we don't have any control over this process. There's a lot of little random variables in the system. There's the clouds, which are also very random. You can kind of think of each solar panel like a pixel, and they're all recording an image of the sky, of the clouds as they pass over the top of the installation. And as the power runs out, they just go out. Okay, I got 18 seconds left.